thought I was just fixing my shoes, ended up glued to the floor, crying, and calling the fire department in a tie and no pants. This was the worst day of my life. It started the second I opened the tiny bottle of Superglue. I don't even know why it was on the counter. Maybe I grabbed it thinking I'd fix the heel of my other shoe. Maybe I just wanted to be prepared for emergencies I've never had. But somehow it ended up in my hands while I was half-dressed, panicking about this job interview I could already feel slipping away. My stomach was doing that weird flip-flop thing it does when I'm nervous, and my brain, in full panic mode, decided that multitasking while sweaty-palmed and jittery was a great idea. I had on my suit. Well, sort of. The jacket was on, tie was uneven, and my socks were mismatched because, of course, I didn't have time to care. My shoes, black and stiff, were sitting there like little soldiers waiting for me to betray them. I grabbed the glue, popped the cap, and before I even realized what I was doing, I tipped it toward the soles of my shoes. And then, in the kind of slow-motion horror that feels like punishment from the universe itself, I pressed one foot down. And it stuck. Like really stuck. At first, I thought maybe it was a weird trick of the light. I tried lifting, twisting, hopping. Nothing. My foot was locked to the tile. My heart went from nervous to full-blown panic mode, and I think I yelped loudly. My cat, who had been pretending to ignore me, bolted under the bed. I tried to explain to myself that it was fine, it was just glue, it would wear off. Except superglue doesn't wear off when you're in a rush, and certainly not when you're standing on it like a human statue. By the time I realized I had no hope of detaching myself quickly, I had already dragged the other shoe onto the glue like some kind of inverted dance. And then, of course, I got nervous enough to make the situation worse. I tried twisting my heel to loosen it, which resulted in this horrific sound, a wet ripping noise that still echoes in my memory, and a tiny piece of tile chipped off. That's when I started swearing. Loudly. I'm pretty sure my neighbors heard every word. I think one of them even knocked on the door. If they did, I ignored it. Can't explain why. Maybe shame or a primal instinct to hide when your shoes betray you. I sat down carefully. Well, as carefully as you can when your shoes are literally glued to the floor, because standing was now terrifying. I stared at my feet like they had turned into two terrible creatures, intent on public humiliation. I checked my phone to see if anyone could come help, but of course, no one was answering. And then I had this moment of clarity, the kind that's almost worse than panic. If I missed this interview, I would have to explain that I didn't show up because I glued myself to the floor. And I laughed, but it was more of a snort-choke hyperventilating thing than real laughter. That's when I called the fire department. I know, it sounds insane. Hello. Yes, I'm stuck to my floor. The dispatcher didn't even flinch, which made it worse because she sounded calm, like this kind of thing happens every day. I tried explaining, again and again, the accidental superglue part, and kept pausing to avoid crying or laughing too hard. I could feel my heart beating in my throat. I had never felt more ridiculous. And then they arrived. The firemen. 3 grown men with tools and serious faces, looking like they were about to defuse a bomb instead of detach a 29-year-old from her kitchen tiles. One of them knelt down and asked, very professionally, if I had tried acetone. I shook my head, unsure if I wanted to admit that I had panicked too much to think straight. They started working, gently prying and dabbing, and I just sat there, trembling, trying not to cry laugh at how absurd this was. Somewhere between almost free and please don't chip the tile more. I realized that this, somehow, would become one of the most humiliating stories of my life. They finally got me loose, and I think I floated up from the floor like a balloon that had been holding too much panic air. My shoes, well, what was left of them, were mangled, sticky, sad little husks, and I was dripping acetone onto the tile like some kind of deranged chemical experiment gone wrong. One of the firemen gave me a look, half pity, half disbelief, and I just laughed because what else could I do? Crying seemed too much, and swearing at them seemed wrong. Somehow, in my disaster, I still had a shred of social decency. Or maybe it was fear. Probably fear. I tried standing again, barefoot this time, and nearly toppled over. The floor felt alien, slick with chemicals and shame. I could still smell the glue, and it was like a perfume of regret that would never leave. I shuffled toward the door, because the firemen were packing up, trying not to laugh at me. I mean, I'm sure they did, but they were polite. I think. It's hard to tell when you're in that much mortification. Your brain keeps making up polite lies. Then came the part one wasn't ready for, the interview. I had called the company earlier, flustered, stammering some excuse about home emergency, without going into detail, praying they wouldn't rescind the meeting. And yet, in some cruel twist, they said, "You can come in a little later if you need to." I had 30 minutes. 30 minutes to clean up, redress, and not look like someone who had recently fought a chemical war with her own kitchen. I ran a bath like a maniac, trying to scrub off glue smell, panic smell, sweat, and the unmistakable aroma of catastrophic human error. I dried off, put on the second best pair of shoes, thank God they weren't glued, and fixed my tie, which now seemed more like a noose than an accessory. My stomach was doing that flip-flop thing again, only louder, angrier, more judgmental. I could practically hear it muttering, "You really did this to yourself, didn't you?" The commute was a blur. Every step outside felt like a spotlight on my shame. What if someone recognized me? What if someone Googled woman Superglued shoes, and it somehow led back to me? My brain, in overdrive, created scenarios that were probably realistic enough to make me sweat in 90-degree heat. I arrived, knocked on the door, and somehow got through the interview without spontaneously combusting. I smiled, answered questions, and even managed a little joke about being well-grounded. Nobody laughed, which I guess is fair. Later, when I was walking home, I kept thinking about the fireman. The weird calmness of the dispatcher. The surreal way my kitchen had become a disaster zone in minutes. And somehow I couldn't help but laugh, quietly, like a guilty person in a library. It was absurd. Absolutely absurd. And yet, in that absurdity, there was something freeing. Something that said, you can survive this. You might look ridiculous, but you'll survive. It's funny, right? Terrible, humiliating, but funny. I've told a couple friends, carefully, with lots of pre-warning, and they either laughed so hard they cried, or stared at me like I was a mythological creature. And yeah, maybe I'm still embarrassed. Maybe I'll always feel that twinge when I open a bottle of glue, or when I see those black shoes in the closet, staring at me like silent witnesses. But I also feel human. Ridiculous, sure. Embarrassed, absolutely. But human. Sometimes, late at night, I replay it in my head, imagining different ways I could have handled it. Maybe I would have just left one shoe stuck, then gone barefoot for the interview. Maybe I could have called a neighbor instead of the fire department. Or maybe I could have slowed down, breathed, and realized that superglue and panic don't mix. But none of that matters. What matters is that I survived. I can laugh now, and most importantly I learned, hopefully, to take a deep breath before doing anything sticky. Literally. The next few days were weird. Every time I stepped into my kitchen, I half expected the floor to snap back and glue me again, like some vindictive domestic booby trap. I avoided the counter where the glue had lived, giving it the side eye like it was judging me. And honestly, maybe it was. I kept telling myself it was funny, that it was a story I'd tell at parties, but the truth? I still wince when I remember the sound of my shoes ripping the tile. That sound will haunt me, like a weird, sticky ghost. I even tried to clean up the mess, because apparently adulting means you don't just leave your chemical warfare behind. I scrubbed and soaked, tossed the ruined shoes into the trash, and wiped down the tile. But nothing could scrub out the humiliation, and I don't think anything ever will. Every time I see a bottle of superglue in the store, I pause. I consider buying it. And then I walk away. Every single time. Friends, of course, have had a field day. My one friend sent me a text that simply said, "So, you're the girl who glued herself to the floor." Noted. And I laughed, because what else can you do when your life has become a cautionary tale? I tried telling my boss, joking about it. But even then, I could feel my cheeks heating up. The words "I was stuck to the floor" somehow feel like the worst combination of embarrassment and absurdity anyone could endure. And yet, there's something about it that feels almost liberating. I've spent so much of my life trying to be perfect, trying not to mess up, trying not to look stupid. And then the universe said nope. Not today. And it handed me a bottle of glue. And I took it. And, well, here we are. Staring at the mess. Laughing, mortified, alive. Somehow, the worst day I could imagine became one of the most memorable. I've tried, slowly, to find humor in it. I think about that day when things start to feel too serious. I imagine telling my grandkids someday, and then your grandma glued her shoes to the floor right before an interview. They'll probably laugh until they cry, and I'll nod, remembering exactly how tiny and stupid and human I felt. There's a weird comfort in that. Maybe it's the reassurance that no matter how prepared you think you are, life will always find a way to glue your plans to the floor. Most importantly, I've learned a few things. Slow down. Breathe. Don't multitask when nervous. And maybe, just maybe, keep superglue far, far away from your shoes. Those are lessons I didn't want to learn the hard way, but I did. And while I still blush at the thought, I also smile. Because if surviving your own glue apocalypse isn't a metaphor for life, I don't know what is. So yeah, that's the story. I glued my shoes to the floor, got rescued by the fire department, and somehow made it to the interview in one piece. Mortified? Absolutely. Laughing now. Slowly, carefully, but yes. And I think that's the thing. Life will embarrass you. Life will glue your shoes to the floor. But if you can survive it and laugh at it, you're doing something right.